You're nothing but a liar and a failure, Dad. Mom made sure you'd get nothing from her estate. That's how my son, Brandon, greeted me at the lawyer's office the morning of my wife's will reading. His smirk burned into me, while my daughter, Rachel, sat beside him, giggling like they had practiced their cruelty together. I can still smell that office. Old leather chairs, stale coffee, the faint must of books that had soaked up decades of other people's family disputes. My hands shook as I folded them over the polished mahogany table. I wasn't some deadbeat who deserved to be humiliated. I'd spent 40 years working as a mechanic in Lincoln, Nebraska. Every scar on my hands came from turning wrenches to keep food on the table and pay off the mortgage on that house. Their mother, my late wife, Linda, had battled sickness for years, and I'd been the one by her side through every chemo session and sleepless night. But none of that mattered to my kids anymore. Brandon leaned back in his chair, smug. "Face it, old man. She didn't trust you with money. Rachel and I already know what's in the will," Rachel chimed in, smirking. "You might get her sewing machine or maybe some of her old cookbooks, if you're lucky." Their words cut deeper than they could ever know. I had raised those two. I taught Brandon how to ride a bike on Maple Street, running behind him until my knees gave out. I walked Rachel down the aisle at her wedding, even though her husband barely shook my hand. And here they were, waiting like vultures for their mother's estate, acting like I was already 6 feet under. Before I go on, let me pause here. If you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, where was I? I sat in that office, surrounded by children who had turned into strangers, and felt something shift inside me. For most of my life, I let people walk over me. I let Linda's side of the family call me just a mechanic. I let my kids take my help for granted. But that day, with my wife gone and my children sharpening their knives, I realized something. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect. And as the lawyer opened the file and cleared his throat, I braced myself, not for loss, but for the storm that was about to unfold, because they thought I was powerless. They thought I'd be humiliated, but they had no idea the truth that was about to come out. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and shuffled the papers in front of him. The room went quiet, but not for long. Brandon couldn't stand silence. He filled it with arrogance. "Let's cut to the chase," he said, tapping his pen against the table like a drumbeat of entitlement. "Mom wanted Rachel and me to have everything. Dad knows that." Rachel leaned forward, her perfume too strong for such a small room. "Yeah, we were the ones who actually helped her the last few years." "You barely did anything, Dad. That one hit like a sucker punch." I swallowed hard, trying to hold my composure. Barely did anything. I was the one who drove Linda to the cancer center in Omaha 3 times a week. I was the one who stayed up when her fevers spiked at 2 a.m., who cleaned her sheets when the sickness made a mess of her dignity. And where were my children? Brandon was off chasing sales commissions, bragging about his new truck. Rachel was busy posting pictures of family dinners I was never invited to. I opened my mouth. "You two don't know what you're talking about." Brandon cut me off with a laugh. "Spare us the sob story. We've heard it 1,000 times. You fixed cars, and you stuck around when Mom got sick. Congratulations. That doesn't make you entitled to her money." The lawyer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "If we could proceed." But Rachel wasn't done. She jabbed her finger across the table at me. "You know what, Dad? You should be grateful if Mom left you anything at all. You've lived in that house long enough. Brandon and I were talking. We'll probably sell it once the estate is settled. It's time we got something back for all the years we had to grow up with nothing." Her words twisted the knife. My house, the one I'd mortgaged, refinanced, repaired with my own 2 hands. They were already talking about selling it like it was theirs. I leaned back, letting their voices wash over me. I didn't fight, not yet. I just let them keep digging their own hole. The lawyer, a thin man with a cautious voice, finally read the opening lines of Linda's will. He started with the formalities, but I caught the way Brandon and Rachel exchanged a knowing glance, like they already knew they had won. Brandon whispered to his sister, loud enough for me to hear, "Told you, he's gonna walk out of here with nothing." I clenched my jaw. For the first time, I didn't feel sadness at their words. I felt something else, something calmer, like the steel edge of a blade cooling after being forged, because they didn't know what Linda and I had talked about in those final months. They didn't know the promises we made when it was just the two of us in that quiet hospital room. And as the lawyer reached the part of the will that mattered, I knew the floor was about to drop out from under them. But I stayed quiet, waiting for their smug little worlds to crack wide open. The lawyer's voice was steady, but the words carried a weight that bent the whole room. "According to the last will and testament of Linda Mae Johnson," he began, "all property, assets, and financial accounts are to be transferred solely to her surviving spouse, Charles Johnson." Silence. For a second, I thought maybe they hadn't heard him. Brandon blinked rapidly, as if the words bounced off his ears without meaning. Rachel's mouth hung open, her glossy smile collapsing into a twisted scowl. "What?" Brandon finally blurted out. "That can't be right." "Read it again." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "It's very clear. Mrs. Johnson left everything to her husband. That includes the family home, savings, and remaining investments." Rachel slapped the table. "No, no, no. She told me. I remember. She said she wanted us taken care of. Dad doesn't need all of it. He'll waste it." I leaned forward, my voice calm. "Your mother and I talked about this. She wanted me to be secure. She knew I'd make my own choices when the time came." Brandon shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. "You manipulated her. You must have. She'd never cut us out like this." The lawyer shook his head. "The will is dated 6 months before Mrs. Johnson passed. Signed and notarized. She was of sound mind. There's no question." For once, I didn't flinch at their anger. Instead, I felt steady, stronger than I had in years. Brandon's voice rose again. "We'll contest it. We'll drag this through court if we have to." Rachel nodded, her face red. "Yeah, you can't just take everything. That house. Mom promised me that house." I watched them, my children, though in that moment they looked more like strangers. Greedy strangers who had already carved up my life like vultures picking a carcass. I stood slowly, letting the legs of my chair scrape the floor. "You two have made your feelings about me very clear. I heard every word. But let me tell you something. Your mother knew who was there for her. She knew who stood by her when the world turned dark. She made her choice." They sneered, but I didn't let it rattle me. Inside, I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. They thought they could bully me, humiliate me, make me doubt myself. But the truth was, Linda had left me not only the estate, but also her final act of trust, and I wasn't about to squander it. That night, after the will reading, I drove back to the house. The old porch light flickered as I unlocked the door, and the smell of cedar and motor oil wrapped around me like an old jacket. I sat at the kitchen table, Linda's chair still across from me, and thought about my next move. Because I knew one thing. Brandon and Rachel wouldn't stop here. They'd come after me, after the estate, after the house. They'd try to bleed me dry with lawsuits or manipulation. And if they wanted a fight, well, I'd been underestimated before. I poured myself a black coffee, staring out the window at the quiet Nebraska night, and I felt the spark of a plan forming. They wanted to play dirty? I'd show them just how much fight their useless old man had left in him. It didn't take long for Brandon and Rachel to make good on their threats. Within 2 weeks, I got a letter from a lawyer in Omaha. They were contesting the will, claiming I had undue influence over Linda. It was laughable, but it still meant months of stress, paperwork, and court dates. At first, I felt that old sting of shame creeping back. Like maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't deserve what Linda left me. But every time I walked past her chair in the kitchen, or her Bible on the nightstand, I remembered the way she'd squeezed my hand in those final weeks and whispered, "Charlie, don't let them bully you. You know what's right." So I fought back. I hired an attorney from Lincoln, a no-nonsense woman named Marcy Jacobs. She dealt with greedy family disputes before, and she knew exactly how to handle kids like mine. "They don't have a case," she said, flipping through the paperwork. "This will was airtight, signed, notarized, witnessed. And you've got medical records proving Linda was sharp as a tack. But if they want to drag this into court, we'll bury them in evidence." I nodded. "Good. I'm tired of rolling over." But the real showdown wasn't in a courtroom. It was in the town itself. Word spreads fast in a place like Lincoln. Folks at the diner started whispering. The pastor at church gave me that concerned look. Even the cashier at the grocery store asked if I was doing all right, considering everything. Brandon and Rachel were running their mouths, painting me as a thief who'd stolen their inheritance. And the town was listening. So when the hearing date finally came, I decided I wasn't just going to win legally. I was going to win publicly. The courtroom was packed that morning. Small-town curiosity turned into a spectator sport. Brandon showed up in a shiny suit he probably couldn't afford, smirking like he had the world by the throat. Rachel wore black like she was attending Linda's funeral all over again, but her eyes gave her away. Hungry, bitter. The judge called the session to order, and their lawyer launched into his performance. "Your Honor, it's clear that Mr. Johnson manipulated his dying wife into leaving him everything. Our clients, the rightful heirs, were unfairly cut out." I sat there, calm as stone. Then Marcy stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't grandstand. She just laid out the facts. Witnesses from the hospice center, the notarized documents, medical testimony that Linda had full mental capacity. And then, the final blow. An audio recording Linda had made with the notary present. Her voice filled the courtroom, thin but strong. "I want everything to go to Charlie. He's the one who stood by me when I needed it most. He deserves peace. My children, well, they've made their own choices." The words echoed through the room like a bell. I looked over. Brandon's face drained of color. Rachel's jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. The judge didn't need much time. He dismissed their case on the spot. But the real punishment wasn't legal. It was the whispers in the gallery, the townsfolk shaking their heads, the pastor leaning over to mutter, "Your kids ought to be ashamed." When we walked out into the Nebraska sunlight, Brandon tried one last jab. "This isn't over, Dad. You'll regret this." I turned to him, my voice calm, almost soft. "No, son. The only regret here is yours. And Rachel's. Because the whole town just saw who you really are." And with that, I walked away, leaving them to stew in their humiliation. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the end. Not yet. After the judge's ruling, life got quieter for me. But not for Brandon and Rachel. Word spread through Lincoln like wildfire. Folks at the diner stopped inviting them to sit at their table. Neighbors who used to wave turned their backs. Even Brandon's boss at the dealership heard about it. Customers don't like buying trucks from a man who tried to rob his own father. Within a month, Brandon was out of a job. Rachel didn't fare much better. She worked part-time at a local insurance office, but small towns remember things. Clients started asking for someone else. The whispers never stopped. As for me, for the first time in years, I felt free. I fixed up the house Linda and I had built our lives in, replaced the creaky porch steps, polished the old oak floors she loved so much. Every nail I hammered, every board I sanded, it was like I was honoring her. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the cornfields, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea. The air was thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass, cicadas humming in the distance, and I thought about the irony. My children had wanted the house so badly, but their greed had made sure they'd never step foot in it again. They lost more than money. They lost their mother's respect, their community's trust, and whatever bond we might have had left. A week later, Brandon showed up at my door. He looked worn down, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. "Dad," he muttered, I need some help, just until I get back on my feet." I looked at him for a long moment. Part of me, the father in me, wanted to reach out. But then I remembered his smirk at the will reading, the way he laughed as he called me useless. "I'm sorry, son," I said quietly, "but you made your choice." I closed the door. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And the most necessary, because in the end, poetic justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth coming to light. Brandon and Rachel thought they could strip me of my dignity, my home, my life. Instead, they stripped themselves of everything that mattered. And me? I gained something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I sat back down on the porch, listening to the crickets start their nightly chorus, and I knew Linda was right. I'd weathered the storm, and I was still standing. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.